Hey guys, this is just Mike of Mitrap Pod, and so today we have some special bonus content for you all relating to our book of the month back in March, Protect and Defend. We wanted to push this out to you before we move into our April book of the month, Extreme Measures, because we were super grateful that a listener, Ben, reached out and let us know that he's between deployments on AA Sub. And he'd be happy to chat about that since Protect and Defend had a really great submarine plot that Chris and I both enjoyed. And we covered it back on the part 2 episode of Protect and Defend. So really awesome that Ben, a fellow listener of Mitrap Pod, appreciates what we were doing with the project and wanted to lend his insight into going underwater, which is something Vince doesn't do too often. We're not very often, in the Navy or on a ship with Mitrap, and so, well, if he is on a boat, he's probably attacking or taking someone out, like Stu Garrett or that Saudi Arabian prince. But anyway. Actual service members in the Navy, we wanted to honor them and shout out people like Ben, who's going to join us today. And he's extraordinarily knowledgeable and experienced in the field. Currently on deployment, I believe now, since we recorded. So we were able to squeeze in a session to pick his brain about that. He really fills us in on what Vince got right about life on a sub and a little bit about operations working in that field. So he's got some great stories, great anecdotes about his time at sea. So we hope you enjoy this interview. A little special midweek or end of week bonus. But don't forget, Monday we will still be picking up with part 1 of Extreme Measures, covering the first half of that book, our book of the month for April. And we'll be back to a normal schedule every Monday from here on out. Just wanted to drop this bonus for you since it relates to Protect and Defend, which we just recently covered. All right. Well, thank you, Ben, for coming on the show. And listeners, hope you enjoy this little extra special bonus interview. Here we go. Hey, guys. Today we have a special guest, Ben. He is a Mitrap fan and listener of Mitrap Pod who reached out and knew that we were covering Protect and Defend, which has a really awesome submarine plot, which is something new for Vince. So thanks, Ben, for reaching out and coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So why don't you tell us a little bit of your background, what the process was like to finally, I believe they call it, get your dolphins and go underwater.
Yep. So I graduated with my undergraduate degree in 2014. I worked for a little bit in the financial sector rather. Decided that wasn't for me and wound up joining the Navy. I went through basic training, submarine school, all that stuff, and wound up getting assigned to a fast attack submarine that was already on deployment. The Navy then flew me out to meet the ship in a foreign port. And within my first 2 days, I was on my first mission. So I was thrown right into it, which was a little nerve-wracking, I'll be honest with you. Came back, finished my qualification process. The qualification process for a submariner can take up to a year, where you learn every part of the submarine. Came back, got my dolphins, deployed again about a year later. Now we are back. We've been back for about a year, and we're gearing up for another deployment pretty soon.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for what you do. I want to know, though, so a lot of thriller writers have some naval scenes. Vince typically doesn't. So when this popped up in Protect and Defend, it was kind of refreshing to be on a ship and then be underwater in a sub and see what's going on. So can you give us a little bit about life on the ship, both the job itself, but also even socially? What's it like with the other service members and just a daily routine? What's it like?
Absolutely. So the daily routine on the submarine is you're woken up by someone who's called the messenger. It's usually the most junior person on board. They're effectively just what sounds like a messenger, and they also act as a human alarm clock. Submarines run on a 24-hour schedule. So one section is standing the watch, the next section is off-going, and there's another section that's oncoming, which is in the rack sleeping. The messenger wakes you up, you go and you eat. Usually you go to what's called a pre-watch brief, where the fire control guys will brief, we have tubes 1 through 4 loaded for launch with these weapons. The sonar guys will brief the environment. Quartermasters, navigation division will brief the water, where we have water, where's good. Radio will go through their comms briefing. ESM, which is electronic support, basically electronic warfare, will go through any threats in the area. And then usually someone will kind of bring it home with any engineering evolutions that have to be done for that day.
Do you rotate through those jobs, or is it highly specialized where you're the guy just to do that one?
No. So enlisted members of the submarine force are sent to a specialized school called A School. Their training, I believe, lasts a year. Officers initially go through nuclear power school, and then they go on to prototype before going on to submarine school. So for a nuclear officer, the beginning of their tour on a submarine is spent in the engine room, standing engineering officer the watch and whatnot. And then finally they, towards the end of that rotation on their first boat, they are brought forward and they stand contact manager, officer of the deck, those watches.
How long would a typical stretch be like that, or a full deployment be, in terms of months, weeks?
A typical fast attack deployment is about 6 months right now.
Wow.
But, there's port calls in there. You're not submerged for the
Sure.
entire thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So,
how about the social life? Do you guys find ways to keep busy? Is there a lot of, you guys ribbing each other? Are you working out? What is there space to do any of that stuff?
my submarine currently has a treadmill, a rowing machine, and 2 bikes, and they are in the most random places. One of the bikes is jammed in between some sonar servers. One of the treadmill is back in the engine room. So it's all over the place. We have a couple free weights. They're very block shaped so that they won't roll around and make noise, because that's really your biggest enemy on a submarine. So you have those, and then there's bands and stuff. So you try and keep busy. Yeah. A lot of it varies for watch teams. More senior watch teams with more senior members who have done a deployment or two, they'll set up like Matthew McConaughey Mondays. They'll set up rom-com Fridays, just something to break up the monotony.
Yeah.
So they watch a lot of movies. And as for ribbing, I mean, this is a family show, so we'll keep it PG. But they're the people who serve on submarines are widely considered to be the most academically gifted members of the Navy, if not the armed services, because it's a nuclear-powered vessel. So that breeds a lot of shenanigans, we'll say.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah. You got to keep it light,
Absolutely.
You got to enjoy it. Well, actually, we get a description, just to bring it back to Vince, of Captain Pete Hallberg, who's in charge of this particular sub in the book. So maybe you could just let me know how on point or not this description of him sounds. So Vince writes, quote, "Captain Pete Hallberg was a prime candidate for an ulcer. The 45-year-old graduate of Annapolis never lost his temper, but he internalized stress, shoving it down into the pit of his stomach, where he fed it with black coffee, 10 cups a day or more. His only saving grace was 20 minutes he put it on the heavy bag in the bowels of the sub's engine room. That and the bottle of Tums antacid tablets that he went through every week." Sound about right?
Yeah, that's actually pretty accurate. The coffee machine is, I don't want to say the pride and joy of the boat, because that's crazy. But there was a slight anecdote for you. While we were on deployment, the coffee machine decided it, didn't want to play nice. And in our electrical division, they tore it apart and put it back together within the span of 2 hours and got it to work.
Yes. And
Yep.
now they're forever heroes.
Yep. As for a heavy bag, finding a place to strap it
Yeah, that's a
where it
little
wouldn't
much.
bang into things isn't so much feasible, but I'd be lying if I said I haven't seen crazier.
Well, I mean, the treadmill's shoved in the
Yeah,
corner of the rowing machine next to the.
yeah. So, if there's a lot of ingenuity that comes with being on a submarine. There's a very famous quote that I once read. It says, "There's room for anything on a submarine but a mistake." So,
Ooh,
yeah.
ooh, yeah, that's it.
So I'm sure that an enterprising captain could find, a couple guys who want to get in good with the boss to find a place for it.
Yeah, hey, that's a good quote.
Absolutely.
So the ship we have, I don't know, I don't recall the exact model or name of it, but they're with the Eisenhower Strike Group in the Persian Gulf, and they are sent out to depart from the main group and follow an Iranian I believe they called it 3 kilo class subs, and there's one that they're trying to track
Right.
that's making these funny maneuvers. I think it goes through the Strait of Hormuz, which is shallow waters, and once it gets out, it starts figure eight patterns and then hides behind a super tanker. Would that raise alarm bells, or would your sonar guys pick up on something like that when other ships are making funny maneuvers, or would you actually follow a foreign vessel? Is that the typical kind of stuff you're tracking?
So I can't
Depends
comment
on the
on
mission.
right. I
Mm-hmm.
can't comment on submarine operations. What I can tell you is that I did just grab the book off the shelf earlier to find the passage. The U.S. vessel is the USS Virginia. It is the lead ship of the Virginia
Yes.
class. It specifically talks about how the sonar operators are able to pick up the Iranian Kilo class, which is a Russian diesel electric. I actually have a
Mm-hmm.
reference here by H.I. Sutton, which let me see if I can find it for you real quick. But
Yeah, I know the frigate they sink also was an old Russian vessel. They said that the Iranians, got
yep,
used up
the
from the
Boston
70s or
class,
something.
very good.
Yeah.
So a Russian Kilo is a diesel electric designed since the 1980s. The backbone of the Russians' Navy conventional submarine force has been widely exported. I
Mm-hmm.
can't recall how many Iran has right now off the top of my head, but it is interesting that it is their most capable submarine at least that I can think of off the top of my head. If the USS Virginia in this story was sent to follow them, it make the part of the story that he talks about where they pick them up on their light. I think he said lightweight wide aperture array, which is
Mm-hmm.
the LWA. There's on either side of a Virginia class, there's 3 panels, which are sonar sensors. So you can definitely pick things up on that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if Iran was sorting their navy, like in the book,
Yeah.
that's something that the U.S. would want to investigate. So it definitely makes sense for the U.S. to look into it. And submarines, obviously, we don't have windows. We do have sonar. So what you can do is you can use background noise in the water to mask the
Mm-hmm.
picture.
Yep.
So what the Iranian captain did in the book does
Yep.
make sense, trying to hide behind the deep merchant who's chugging along, you know, because the sonar guys can only see what's in front of them. They can kind of
Yeah.
pick it out. Some gifted ones are more apt to it, but it gets a little you know, if you're throwing a smoke grenade, it's hard to see who's running around and who's
Sure.
in the zoo.
And Vince, there's a passage you're spot on where the Iranian sub is hiding behind a supertanker and it's masked because Vince writes the acoustics were horrible. Add to that the freighter traffic of all shapes and sizes, fishing boats, pleasure crafts, and the sonar men were left with a din that was comparable to trying to listen to your cell phone while sitting in the front row of a rock concert. So all
Right.
this, ruckus is being kicked up by other ships in the vicinity, and I think at one point there's a lot of mud in the water, a lot of debris in the water that's screwing it up. So that sounds about
Right.
right.
To some extent. So sonar as a discipline follows what's called MASINT, which stands for Measures and Signature Intelligence. Um, And there are specialists in the Navy who can pick out like this tiny little line,
Mm,
something that like it looks like, fuzz, and they point at the screen, they're like, that's him.
wow.
But again, if the ocean environment isn't conducive, if there's super tankers, it it can get extremely difficult.
Yeah.
And I think Vince Flynn mentions one guy, I think he called him Sully, who he says he's a little crazy and he's picking it out. That's that's actually extremely accurate. There's always one guy who's just slightly off tilt, and
Yeah.
he's like, listen, I know this sounds crazy, but what if it's
But they
this?
could pick it up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you're like, all right, man, we'll try it. So
Yeah.
usually I would trust that guy.
That plus the experience of Captain Hallberg, because at one point, I think Hallberg goes off for a rest, like he's off
Yeah.
shift. But the guy he leaves the controls to is less experienced, and not to say won't do as good a job, but he does miss something. Like this sub is doing all these crazy figure eight patterns and going in and out, and he's like, Cap, I think you would have caught that. I'm sorry, I missed it. And Cap's like, that's all right. It
Yeah,
comes with experience.
a lot of it is unfortunately, learning from experience. We have the Navy has something called lessons learned, which is pretty much what it sounds like. Basically, something goes wrong, and we write it up and we study it. Hey, what they do wrong, how to go wrong, what could they have done different, and some of them are hundreds of pages long. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's just in that moment. Hey, what did I mess up? All right, let me take a breath, shake it off, and get back
Yep.
to it.
Yep. Yep. Wow. And this ship is described as 377 feet with 134 submariners on it. About average, or I mean, does it depend on the type? But does that sound about the size of a crew even these days?
Um,
134.
the crew is dependent. So
Mm-hmm.
depending on the mission, you may have embarked specialist depending on what you're doing. Occasionally, you'll do stuff with special operations forces like the SEALs, and they'll be berthed down the torpedo room, eating all the good food, and so
Special treat.
I'd
Yeah,
say it's
watching the
about
good movies.
I'd say it's about average. It can be a little a little cramped sometimes, but sometimes if you're just going in local waters to do some training, it can be pretty empty on board.
Mm-hmm. You know, in the book and on our last episode, actually, I found some research of real drills that the Iranians were running and some craziness they've done. Have you heard of this? They actually
Yep.
they made a mock U.S. Aircraft carrier and then accidentally sank the mock one, which clogged up the Strait of Hormuz. Is that kind of craziness going on out there? Are there some other navies that are just that clueless?
Yeah, if I recall correctly, Iran did what they called Operation Noble Prophet. I think it was called. I think that's their yearly exercise
Okay.
where they had like guys landing on it, with their
Yeah.
it was like I saw the propaganda video too, and I was like, wow, this is
Yeah.
wow, Hollywood needs to step it up. This is awesome. And I don't know how much training value you get out from shooting, a big barge, but
Right.
it was certainly something to watch at the very least.
Yeah. A spectacle.
Yeah. Iran actually has this is just a strange thing to explain to people, but it's widely reported online. Iran has two navies. A lot of people don't
Hmm.
realize that. So they have the Islamic Republic of Iran Navy, which is their first
Hmm.
navy, and then they have the IRGC Navy, which is the Republican Guard. The
Mm.
Republican Guard they're the ones who you always see on speedboats online, running around. And I think I forgot what year it was, but I remember I found this online. I could send you the link when I find it later, but a U.S. Marine Corps general had to do a war game where he was basically in charge of Iran's forces and he was up against the
Mm.
U.S. and he just had these suicide bombers on speedboats mob U.S.
Mm.
ships, and
Mm.
he wound up winning the war game. And then they got
That's
mad
effective.
then they got mad at him because like, you cheated. No, I won.
Eh, You need people like that, though. If you're trying to be one step ahead and you're trying to plan ahead, you need creative thinkers who are going to go
Yeah,
outside the box and think of that stuff.
absolutely. I think the first place I read about that actually was crack.com, the comedy website. I remember
Yeah.
reading, I was like, this can't be real.
I mean, look at the coal, though, right? And
Yep. The US is cold.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what happened. And so why couldn't it happen again
No,
if the fight's that
absolutely.
serious?
And that's something that to bring it back to the book, that's something that Vince Flynn does a good job with
Yeah.
how when he describes, contact happening in the Middle East and all these organizations, you know, I think he mentions, the Kurds are up against
Yep.
miscellaneous paramilitary groups in Iraq. It's pretty accurate,
Yeah.
the way it's happening. Obviously, he has Mitch Rapp, taking him out, but even that scene, it's written to a pretty realistic level for the most part.
We hear that not just from yourself, but other experts in their fields and other people with experience. Like just last week, we had on a Secret Service agent commenting on active treason and again said, got a lot of the specs and what the life is like. And then next week, probably actually right before this interview airs, we talked to a guy who worked for the CIA in executive protection of the director. And he
Wow.
said, that operation had a lot of elements that relate to the real world. Like you said, using the Kurds. Sometimes they would use the local forces, either police forces or other allies in the area. But if they didn't trust them, they'd give them a bait and switch and send them to a different site or give them a wrong map or wrong plans. And then they just pull off the operation as they
Yeah,
need. So I just keep hearing over and over that a lot of these storylines are just, they're in tune with what real people in the world are, what operators like yourself are going through.
absolutely. They're very well researched books. When Kyle Mills took over, I think his expertise, I think he might have some friends who work for European governments because
Mm,
some of the stuff is it's not different, it's just parallel. So it's kind of
yes.
like, it's like a shirt, it's the same shirt, it's just a slightly different color. And
Yup.
interesting to, see how he does that.
His father was FBI in a very high level position with, I want to say, somewhere in the UK, if I'm not mistaken. So I think you're spot on picking up on that. And like Red War, all about Russia, he really gets a lot of the internal Russian politics, I think, right.
Absolutely. Red War actually had one scene that I found very funny where I think Rap gets picked up by a British boat, probably if I had to guess, an astute class or
Okay.
one of those boats, and all of a sudden they take a big angle, and he's like, "Oh my God, are we getting shot at?" Uh, you know, on at least on U.S. boats, that's something that you're going to announce to the whole crew, like, "Hey, we're being shot at. You better get to where you need to be."
Yeah. Yeah. Battle stations.
Absolutely.
So speaking of some of these other books, let's hear about your rap fandom. How'd you get into it? Do you remember? Is there a favorite book or a first book that you picked up?
Um, so I got into thrillers in a very strange way. My grandmother, this is a strange story. She got the book Nightfall, which is more of a detective book.
Okay.
Um, and she read it and she gave it to me, and she's like, "Yeah, it's a detective book. I think you'd like it." And I said, "Okay." The first scene is a rather graphic sex scene, which I couldn't believe my grandmother had given it to me, but I was like, "Okay, cool." And then I was pretty much hooked. I got into the rap novels themselves on my first deployment.
Okay.
I was new, my sleep schedule was immediately thrown off because I was working 16 hours a day, didn't really know how to get into sleep. And some guy basically handed me a book and said, "Here, read this, it'll help you fall asleep." So I
Nice.
think the first one I read was, let me see if I can see it. Yeah, I think it was Transfer of Power. And
Yes.
yeah, they honestly they've been some good books.
Yeah.
And then as I progressed in my career, I got a Kindle, super lightweight, easy to throw under your pillow, super awesome. So I started downloading them and reading them. When I was you know standing in line waiting for food or waiting for a something to happen. and I got into them. I really liked the not Total Power, the one before it.
Lethal Agent.
Lethal Agent,
About the
absolutely.
virus. Love that one.
With the virus, especially what's happening in today's society,
Absolutely.
I found that a little too close to home, honestly, because
Oh,
he
I
wrote it
know.
just before the outbreak.
Yeah. I mean,
So,
Kyle was researching that book in 2019, early 2019.
right?
It's crazy. And I mean, besides that, even if it wasn't a story that was so perfect and fitting for today's world, just as a thriller and a book, I thought it was fantastic. It's
Absolutely.
among my favorite rap books. And, you know, that's saying something. I thought
Yeah,
Kyle nailed that one.
absolutely. And then, that book and Total Power, how they both start with, while he starts both of them with effectively saying, "Hey, I did a bunch of research on this stuff. I
Yeah.
have to change some things because this is
Yeah.
actually, not great."
It's true. There was a funny one where Kyle told us he had to set Total Power in the winter, even though he planned to make it a summer book, because there was no possible scenario, like he was wargaming it out. There's no possible scenario if that happens in the summer that it doesn't cause massive wildfires
Oh,
and basically
absolutely.
destroy the country. So he's like, I had to go to winter just so the whole country doesn't die off.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was very well done.
Yeah.
They've all been pretty good. His
Yeah.
books and if you're familiar with Brad Thor's books,
Oh, yeah.
also Brad Thor I think did I think he has a background in research. I think he might have been a history major in college or something. So
He's big. He's big on the geopolitics,
yeah,
Brad Thor, and he really gets that right. You know, Chris isn't here, and I'm sorry I didn't get to talk to Chris. I think he would have loved meeting you and picking your brain.
next
Chris
one.
is big on Brad Thor. He's trying to convince us to maybe pick up a season 2 of the podcast when we're done with rap. So
Okay,
something might be on the horizon for
that'd be
us in that
awesome
regard.
because he has quite the library. I'm looking at it right now.
And Black Ice is coming out really soon. I think this summer, if
Yes,
not June or July.
I have it pre-ordered. I unfortunately I'll be deployed, but my plan is to pull in to some port call with my Kindle, connect to
There you go.
Wi-Fi, and passively download it. So
Sweet.
yeah,
Hey, that sounds good.
yeah.
Well, I guess one thing we didn't get to was favorite character. Are you a Scott guy besides Mitch? Right? Are you a Scott guy, an Irene guy, Marcus Dumond?
I I really do like Marcus Dumont. I like the fact that I kind of see a lot of hit myself in him. He's kind of this nerdy guy who his contribution is his brains. Where just by where I work, we're not front lines. We're basically analysts underwater. I do
Mm,
like him, but other than him, Scott Coleman all the way. He's Navy.
Scott.
You got to stick with the Navy.
We just had a listener. She listened to our Protect and Defend write up, and she's like, "You guys missed it. You know why you rated it so low and why we were pretty low on the book as a whole?" She goes, "There was no Scott." I was like, "Oh my God, you're right.
Is
He
there?
wasn't even mentioned."
I didn't even think of it.
Me neither.
Maybe
I
that's
got kind of caught up in the storyline. I totally didn't realize no Wicker, no Scott. And so I'm going to have to shout her out on our next episode
yeah,
for
that's
pointing that
awesome.
out.
And I mean,
Those. Mhm.
other than that, I think I also have to say Anna. I like that she's always giving Mitch crap. I think that's an awesome way to kind of humanize him. This way, he's not just this robot like killer running around the world,
It's true.
taking care of business.
And you might know what that's like getting back from deployment and getting nagged and having so much to figure out, or you got to do the finances or whatever. Just
Yeah,
the few months you have to yourself.
yeah. It actually gets. It's really surreal. There was one day we got back from deployment. Like a couple days later, I was out with some friends and I was early. I got to the bar earlier. I was at the bar, drinking a beer, waiting for them to show up. And I was like, this is so surreal. This is weird. I was like, what the hell am I doing here?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's weird to come home. You have to, take a couple days and shake it off.
Yeah. Being on land, being underwater, not just physically, but just your whole awareness of the environment and society. It must be something.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
it's different. But it's part of life.
Hey, that's a sacrifice we all thank you for. So
No, it's honestly a pleasure. It's an awesome job.
That is awesome. You know what? I love hearing that so much. I'm going to message you if you're okay sharing a mailing address, send you some stickers, a bookmark, and a No Limits t-shirt. So I'm wearing the black one here.
Oh,
For being a
that's
service
cool.
member, I'm gonna hit you up with that, some of our swag.
Thank you. And I have to say, I really like the concept of the show. Just two friends that enjoy the series and basically want to turn their hobby into something to share with everyone. I think that that's awesome. I'm hugely supportive of you guys.
Thanks a lot, man. Thank you. That's why we appreciate you, and we wouldn't be doing it unless we hear from listeners like you. So thanks for reaching out.
Of course.
If ships or submarines come up again in one of the future books, you mind if I give you a text, see if we can arrange something else to pick your brain?
Absolutely. And if you have any questions about just how, government, I guess, security questions about how they do that, shoot me a message. If I'm on
Cool.
land, I'll try and give you the best unclassified answer.
Hey, that sounds great. Thank you, Ben, for coming on. Really appreciate it. Good luck with your next deployment.
All right, thank you. Take care.
Just a disclaimer, this podcast is not affiliated with Vince Flynn, Kyle Mills, or Simon & Schuster, but thank you to them for bringing us the wonderful world of rap. And the music soundtrack is Guerrilla Tactics by Raphael Crux.